Hello, good evening. We are back after the summer break. Now it's early October, a little bit late, but for organizational reasons, we decided to make in the early October our first IP business talk. The same rules as we managed is the last time, or when you are more often here or frequently here, you know the rules. So we have a chat, and Sabine Rehaber is here with me for the next 45 hours. So if you have a question or a remark or whatever, write it in the chat. And when it fits, I will pick it up and discuss it with Sabine. So that's my guest today, Sabine Rehaber. And first of all, she will explain her background, where she is now, and why she is on fire for her topic. Sabine, please tell us who you are.
Thank you for the intro, Alex. Yes, let me share with you first and foremost who I am. My name is Sabine Rehaber. I'm originally German, but I think I'm a Brit by heart. So I live in London, I work in London, and I currently work for HDF Limited. So what brought me here today is a bit of a long-winded journey, but I'll shorten it for you. So I started out the same month, coincidentally, I started out the same month, 20 years after the EPO came into existence, working in the IP industry. So that's 30 years now. I started out as an IP paralegal, certified paralegal, having done a vocational degree in Munich. And over the last 30 years, I've had quite the journey. A lot of the time working in private practice as a paralegal. I've worked in-house. I've worked for a service provider and a software provider. I've always found, and this is also one of the contradictions I find, that to me, it's a bit of a paradox that we tend to see the role of a paralegal quite narrow. So we want people that are very switched on and very on the ball, but we try to squeeze them potentially into quite narrow job definitions. And I rebelled against that. Wasn't always to my advantage, but I rebelled against that. I then started doing the first projects, didn't call it that at the time, sort of setting up branch offices and the like, or setting up helping set up a department. That was when I first came in touch with, not calling it that, with project management. Now, by definition, I'm, first of all, extremely curious. And I have to admit, I get bored very easily and very quickly. So I needed, I'm quite happy to admit that. I get bored extremely easily. So in developing my career, having successfully convinced myself that I wasn't cut out for any kind of science degree, which is a complete lie, but that's for me to sort out. I needed something that provided enough stimulation. And that wasn't, for me, in a paralegal context anymore. And then I sort of, unofficially almost, took on various roles, later officially. Before that, unofficially, I was the person in organizations that people said, oh, this is something that no one else wants to do. Let's put it on her desk. Now, that's the right kind of stimulation for me. So out of that, developed this interest into, well, first of all, management, organizational management. I think it was a natural progression for me. You learn enough about how organizations work through experiencing how they don't work a lot of the time in IP. Sorry to say that, but there's room for improvement, which is why I'm here today with you. And I wanted to get a grip on how does it look like? Well, how does it look if we work really well together? So first of all, how do we work efficiently? How do we make improvements? How do we approach that? How do we make it last? How do we take people on board? I think the main part for me in this work, this might spark an interest for some of you on the call. I fundamentally love people. I'm interested in people. I'm interested in what makes us tick, what makes us decide the way we decide, where we get scared and why we get scared, what makes us not take on a change or opt for a change. I'm just very curious about that people side of things. So project management and process improvement gives me personally the best possible platform while still being able to work in the IP industry. So it serves me really well.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I have the feeling and the experience that especially our IP experts are, basically they are experts, which means they like to deal with expert questions, tricky, complex issues, but typically people are not the point. Yeah. So tell me. So it is. So they are proud of excluding the people from the question, from the solution, whatever. And what you say is, and I mean that is really, when we come to project and process management, it's about people, and that is people, to a certain extent, the opposite of this kind of expert work. When you exactly say, I don't want to handle people, I want to solve the case or win the case or whatever.
Yes, it's quite interesting, Alex, you say that, because of course you're absolutely right. So in the IP sphere, we usually deal with highly, as in sometimes frighteningly experienced people, very intelligent people, experts in their field, that tend to neglect the people side of things. I remember I was talking to a senior partner of a firm that I used to work for, who was responsible for HR. And I was talking to him about the psychology of change management. And he said to me, quite literally, "Oh, psychology is not something I believe in. I've been in the military, so psychology is not something I deal with." And I thought, how can you be responsible for HR if you don't believe in psychology? But there we are. And I think what I do, now I'm spilling the beans, of course, now I'm giving away all my secrets in the first 5 minutes. I approach that through the back door. So the nice thing is that when we talk about, and I'll soon in a minute share with you what we actually mean when we talk about project management and process improvement and who it's for, I don't actually go into it telling people, right now we have to start reflecting now and we better start meditating, or sort of approaching it from that angle and focusing on that people side. But what I do is, by applying the right methodologies and bringing people on board, the people side comes out automatically. And I'll share in a minute how that comes about. To me, like I said, it's still the most important part. Now, for some of you on the call, other parts might be equally or more important or more interesting. But to me, it's the core element, because for any type of change, who you need on board is the people. You've got to excite people. We never talk about that in IP. We work in one of the most exciting industries on the planet. We never talk about how to excite the people that work in it. What does it take for people to go, yeah, I want to take myself and my organization to the next level, and then the level beyond that? And how do we shape that? And I think that's, for me, that's kind of the bigger context of what makes this work so beautiful.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I think motivation, inspiration, that's really something which we need. And we have to think about people. Yeah, so let's start with this. We want to talk about project and process management. Okay. So I would assume, I mean, what I see is that some of my MEPLM alumni are here, so I would say they have heard about it. But most IP people either don't care, are not interested in, don't know really what it means. So what does that mean? Project process management in an IP context.
So that's a very, very excellent question, and I would like to answer that in two parts. So first of all, what is it? And because you've touched on it so eloquently now, what are the common misconceptions? Maybe let's start with the misconceptions. So now, generally, we tend to think about project management, if we think about it at all in those terms. Project management in IP, according to my experience and what people have shared with me, is essentially someone comes to you and they say, this has to be done. So something gets dropped on your desk, you look at it for a minute and you go, okay, I've got to handle that somehow. And then you tuck in. There's no strategy to it. You just know you have to get it done. That's what we call project management. And that couldn't be further from what it actually is. So what it is we're applying here certain structures and methodologies that allow us a strategic approach to how we manage projects, to how we improve processes. And the first and foremost thing, and this is counterintuitive to basically anyone in IP, otherwise it's very well suited, and I'll get to that in a minute. We don't start with the answers, okay? It's usually intuitive, but not correct to go in and say, oh, I know how it's done. And that's often, of course, the expert wisdom in IP says, I don't need to talk to anyone, I know the solution. And if they don't believe it, then they're in the wrong because I know the solution. And we press on and then we do that. That's precisely what we're not doing. So we're talking about project management. First of all, let me explain who it's for in an IP context. Well, essentially, there is absolutely no context that it's not brilliantly suitable for. But in our sphere today, I would say it's especially beneficial in private practice, in in-house departments, in startups, in SMEs, specifically when we're talking SMEs and startups and smaller firms, because they don't often have the infrastructure to even handle their IP properly. So they could really benefit from a more structured approach. But really any type of in-house department. I know that, of course, most of the big in-house departments have some kind of functionality around process management and process improvement.
What I'm always try to explain to the students is that it is funny to see the evolution of the IP function over the time in a company. So you start, you be a startup or whatever, and then you grow and grow, and sooner or later you make trademark filings and patent filings, whatever, and then somebody says, we should have somebody who takes care here in our company about these issues, yeah, and this is the starting point. So after, and then you need the next one and the next one and the next one, and you create resources, you create budgets, whatever. But sooner or later, somebody comes, for example, to me and say, Alex, does that make sense? What we're doing, how we're doing that? So should we organize IP under the CTO, under the CFO, whatever? Yeah. So questions where I would say, hey, honey, we should talk about strategy and implementation and how to organize it at the end, but that comes not from simply an evolutionary path where you just hire more people because there is more work. That's how the things typically are created. And then you jump in and say, look, process management might make sense.
So, for example, you've touched on something very important, because this is exactly why we've created, and you've had the idea to create, the IP Business Structure Committee that I'm very, very happy to chair and co-chair with my two fellow co-chairs who come
Congrats,
on board.
by the way, for your IPPM committee.
Thank you very much. I'm very blessed and very, very happy. Yes, and we've got big plans. I'll touch on those later. But essentially, what it often takes, and it's counterintuitive initially, is taking a step back and reviewing where we are. So project management, which is distinct from process improvement, but they are connected. Project management comes in, it says, now hang on, where are we? What is it that we want to do? Why do we want to do that? Who are the decision makers? Now, you've touched on something there, because very often it'll very quickly flush out in an organization that it's not quite clear who the decision makers are for any particular topic. It could also flush out or touch on, there's problems with our governance because we don't actually know who's responsible for what, and we don't know what the reporting structures are, and we don't know who makes decisions in which context. But we ask questions first and foremost. And of course, these questions, by and large, are always strategic in some sense. So either because you've already defined it as a goal, as a strategic goal, or because it influences the strategy of the organization. So it's important to take that step back. In project management, we call that a business case. So before you jump in, which is an IP intuitive reaction, you jump in and you install some solution, or you come up with a new client service. Before you even do that, Let's go in, ask ourselves all of these questions. What's the purpose? What do we do? Why do we do it? Who are the beneficiaries? Do we actually know that they need what we think they need? Whether that's internal clients or external clients. Do we know that? So we prepare a business case, we do our market analysis, we look into all the factors that feature into this project. We want to make an informed decision. Now, potentially we're committing quite a few resources. It's important to make an informed decision. It's important to carve out, who is this for? Does this fit in the scheme of things? Does it fit into a flow of strategy that we've carved? Now, I'm going to be provocative and say, do we have a strategy? What is our strategy? Do we have values? Do we have a proposition long term? 5 years, 10 years, what do we want to deliver? How do we want to deliver that? And how do our projects fit into that? Very often you can then, so it's very much interactive. So you would define a project team, a core team, and a wider team, and people have responsibilities. Now that also touches on, do we know who's responsible for what? So what I do when I handle projects is I define very clearly who in the project team is responsible for what. I also define very clearly where that responsibility ends. We often forget to do that. We often forget to say, and this is where your responsibility stops and it needs to be escalated. And then who does it need to be escalated to? So it's a very, in theory and in practice as well, I'm doing it on a daily basis. It fits in with an IP, it fits into an IP context because it's first of all, it's a very intellectual endeavor. It's highly strategic. It's very tactile, and we're dealing with processes. So IP is all about processes. That's essentially what we do all day long, is we worry about processes, global processes.
So I like very much what you say. I had a wonderful discussion many years ago with the former head of IP at Nestlé, and we talked about organization, and it was exactly how I explained that they have, of course, a huge department, but never run anyhow this kind of organizational questions. And he told me, he said, Alex, what do you say? What are you talking about? Strategy implementation, strategy structure fit, process organization. At the end, how the processes in IP are written in the law. Yeah, I said, what? What exactly are you saying there? And he was convinced that this is the truth. Okay. And that was the starting point where I say, come on, think about how you make your renewals and how you interact with R&D guys and whatever. You don't find anything of that in the law.
Yeah.
But then I just want to mention where you have to start with an explanation why process management is so important.
And I couldn't agree more, Alex. And the thing is, of course, we know that the processes aren't in the law. What's in the law is the requirements we have to fulfill and the specific delineation under which circumstances, how they are to be fulfilled. Doesn't tell us anything about how we interact with other stakeholders within our organizations and also our external stakeholders. Doesn't tell us anything about that. And what we do when we talk about process improvement is we talk about creating efficiencies. What we're really talking about is let's actually approach this, this acronym SMART. SMART collaboration means make it specific, make it measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. What we're doing is we're freeing up, and this becomes more relevant. I think this topic couldn't be more to the point now in our times. This is going to become ever more relevant with the advance of AI. So let's automate what we can automate. Let's create efficiencies where we can. Let's make sure that the highly skilled people we have in IP can actually focus on the tasks where they add value and where that value cannot be added in any other way. So ideally, that's what we'd get to, is to say, let's create these, let's reduce costs, let's create efficiencies, let's understand our other stakeholders, our clients, our internal clients as well, and what they need. This is often where you find that there's very little understanding of what other departments might need, never mind external stakeholders. And what I really want to stress now, it all sounds very dead serious now, but these methodologies and tools and their application, to be quite honest, is a lot of fun. So once you get into the nitty-gritty of it, there's some tools that are honestly fun. And another thing I would like to bring in is it has an effect not just on our organizations. It has an effect on how I work, how I live, how I structure myself, how I think, how I am able to clearly define what I'm talking about.
So my experience is that when you talk about process management with a patent attorney, okay? So then what the expert hears, so you say, you talk about efficiency, yeah? And what this IP expert hears is now narrowing my my possibilities to work. So you want to streamline me, you want that I become a blue collar worker, which is always doing the same mechanical thing. So I have to be free to create the best possible results, and you come with your process management and just want to create a cage and KPIs and all of that things, and this is the opposite of creative work, which I have to do.
Yes, that's actually one of the misconceptions, isn't it? And I agree. That's one of the misconceptions is, so you're trying to dictate how I work. No, I'm actually trying to liberate you, quite literally. I'm trying to liberate you from doing the same mundane tasks day in and day out and still have to think about them, when you could actually spend your time doing something more worthwhile, like having a cup of coffee or a chat with your colleague if need be. That's the whole point, is to free us. So that's one of the misconceptions, though, and that's that resistance to change, which I found, I can see a few people logging off the call now, but I found a lot of the time in private practice, there's another paradox for me, that we're the industry that deals by definition with innovation, with intellectual property. Why are we so resistant to innovation then? Doesn't make sense.
That is fascinating. This is absolutely fascinating.
It's the paradox. And mostly in private practice, of course, you have this, and this is where the people aspect comes in. People have built up their part of a practice. They are scared that they're relinquishing control, when it's actually the opposite. You have more control the more streamlined and efficient your processes are. It gives you more control over the whole thing, not less. And I would also add another thing, and this again is true for a lot of, especially in-house departments, but in-house and private practice departments. We tend to then go and look at processes, and then we discover that it doesn't quite run as well as we would like it to. Okay. In the worst case scenario, we discover that because actually something slipped through the net. And then instead of sitting down and taking the time to rectify it and to think it through strategically, we put a plaster on it. There's a Band-Aid solution until it becomes a quilt of solutions. And of course, that actually bears its own, there's a danger in that. The more complex you make it, the more you add on, the higher the risk. So it's actually not the right approach to take. And of course, again, you usually have in IP then the specialist to say, I know what my clients need, I know what my clients want, so I know how these processes work. Those are two different things. Those are two different things. There's also, of course, always an element of, well, I'm all for change. The only thing you have to know is I'm perfect and everyone else needs to change, and this is something external to me. So I've often heard that, Sabine, you do whatever it is you need to do, as long as it doesn't impact me. That's not the nature of change, though. So there has to be an understanding, and that's also where the people element comes in, cultivating and fostering the understanding that change is a participatory exercise. You can't escape it, but you can't escape it. The choice in IP and in any other industry is you can either choose to stand still where you are and eliminate yourself, sorry to break the news to you, or you can actually lean into that change and be in control and collaborate, strategically collaborate with one another, and be a trailblazer in how this change could look for your organization, but also for an entire industry.
I had a wonderful discussion with Ivan Gauci. He's an MEPLM alumnus. He works in the EU IPO. Okay, and I made a post, a LinkedIn post about what Bastian Best said about the advent of AI, and that the definitely the patent attorney job will be disrupted. Okay, I mean, what means disrupted? Disrupted means change. Okay, you have to adapt. So and then after some tearing and tossing, he said, he wrote, Naya, so I don't believe, Alex, that that patent attorneys will be completely abolished. I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. And then he said, but time will tell. Okay, and that rings a bell. Okay, because yes, Ivan, time will tell, but when you have to make your money on a free market, you have to adapt as early as possible to these developments, because otherwise you will be killed. And this is what innovation tells us. So nothing against the conservative branch, but a wait and see, or a time will tell approach to what happens right now here in that branch will be deadly for many participants. And so these behavior, okay, so David Tees calls it dynamic capabilities. The ability to change has something to do with the understanding of your processes and your ability of making projects. I mean, you are the ones who help that they are able to change. Otherwise, time will tell is not an option.
Exactly. And to be honest, I also think now there's two options here. You can either ride the wave, and that's never been as true as it is now. You can either ride that wave or you can be crushed by it. If you decide to ride that wave, ride it, have these conversations, go through these change processes. It's fun. I won't sit here and lie to you and say it's not challenging. Yes, it's challenging, but it's also fun. It's also fun. Like I said, let's think about the organization, but it's also fun to see in yourself how much further you can come, how much further you can grow and push yourself, that you find yourself all of a sudden thinking along lines that maybe a month ago you didn't think were possible, or you would have ridiculed, you would have thrown out the window. You would have said, no, never in my life will I think about this, or even allow that thought. So it's really this kind of continuous improvement. It's like you've described it. It's a mindset. It's a mindset. Now, the other thing, of course, you'll never be able, in my experience anyway, to bring everyone on board and all of a sudden you've transformed everyone's thinking and they're just happy to be on board. There will always be the odd voices that are resistant for their own reasons. That's not even the point. As long as you manage to bring a sufficient majority along with you, and very often it's then by way of demonstration that those that are more resistant to change will be quite happy actually to jump on board with you once they've seen what it actually does. So there's specific things you also should keep in mind. This is why project management is something, and this is something that's very much at the heart of what I do with my committee. I personally think this is we're not even talking an expertise of the future because it's here. So I would love to open up avenues specifically in IP to learn these kinds of skills. And to that extent, and I'm only going to tell you that and leave you with that teaser, we're working behind the scenes to make courses available, to share that learning, to share it in a way. you can adapt.
That's great. That's a great news. And I think we will hear a lot from your committee in the future. My question is about, you mentioned approaches, methodologies, tools. And typically these kind, so of course IP is maybe the last branch or industry which is talking about process optimization. So in many industries that happened over the time, and that means we have these approaches, we have these methodologies, because at the end management is about efficiency, and the more efficient company will win the competition. So is there a set of tools, and can they be used maybe even beyond what they were original thought for? What is your, because people like methodologies, they like tools which they're hands-on, they can do something with it. Okay, so it's not philosophy, it's something to do.
That's true. Yeah. So yes, and yes to both of that. So first of all, of course, we do have methodologies. Now, interestingly, Alex, you probably know all of them, and I knew them as well, but not in an IP context. So that's what we're working on. That's what we're making available, is to translate it not just to a legal context, but to an IP specific context. Now, the methodology, now, first of all, for project management, this always involves around how do we actually organize and coordinate a project? What are the first steps, the preparatory steps, the business case? What does that entail? What parts does it have to have? There's very simple elements that we know from general project management, what has to feature into such a business case to even be in the position to make decisions on any given project that you might want to do. A lot of that also has to do with assessing not just benefits, but risks, preparing budgets. This is something we hardly ever do in IP. If I do this, what's the budget required? What are the resources required? What are the potential risks, and how do we mitigate them? This falls into the IP spectrum. What's the risk connected to the steps we take? To scope it out, to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, okay, to have that in writing, to develop it. And of course, for process improvement, there's any number of tools. I imagine many people on this call would have heard at least a few names before. Many of them come from production. So that would be Lean, the Lean methodology, Six Sigma. So Lean came out of Toyota originally, Six Sigma Motorola. There's the Kaizen, the continuous improvement, also Toyota. There's any number of methodologies that we technically know already. We just have to translate them to make them fit our specific type of business. And I would argue that IP businesses, by and large, whichever corner of IP you inhabit, we operate under, any legal context operates under different under a different sort of premise than a production, a sort of production site or whatever. So there's a few that I really love. There's a very simple one, PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, is one of the methodologies. So I don't even want to throw too much in, but because it always has to be seen in context. What is best suited for what you're trying to improve? What is it that's on your desk that you're trying to do? I also really like, and that is very underrated in IP, the Gemba walk, which is essentially, all of these things are so intuitive when you think about it. Go where the action takes place. So you want to improve a process, talk to your formalities staff, to your administrators. Actually, don't just talk to them. Go and sit down and learn about the process and do the process yourself. Run through it a couple of times and see what sticks out to you. Speak to the people who actually do the work. Speak to your clients. We hardly ever take the opportunity to really dive into the nitty-gritty of it, possibly for fear of looking like we don't know what we're doing, but it shows the opposite. It shows an interest. It shows an interest and a proactive approach to what are we doing and can we make this better? So yes, there's methodologies. I tend to stick to those quite rigorously. because again, very good for IP actually, because it gives us a framework. It gives us an ironclad framework. What are the questions we have to ask? What are the steps we have to take? If we follow that, we're going to improve our process. It's that simple. If we leave out
Okay.
steps because we think we know the answer, probably not going to be successful. So from that perspective, I believe that clarity of the frameworks is actually something that lends itself to the IP industry extremely well.
So, do you really think that methodologies which were created for producing cars, which is a very repetitive work, which is a lot of manual work, that these kind of methodologies can be used for knowledge workers, how Peter Drucker called them? Our IP experts are knowledge workers, and they have to find creative solutions for complex problems. So, I mean, I can see these repetitive work in the field of administration, but when it really comes to projects which needs this kind of creativity, do you think that these kind of methodologies can be applied?
Now, if you were to pick out just that part of a process where we need the knowledge work, then of course, I probably wouldn't do that. I would look at the whole package of how that process works. There's a very, very good quote from W. Edwards Deming, who's considered a bit of a guru of quality management and quality control. And I tend to agree with him. He said, if you can't describe what you are doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So which parts of the I quite like that. It's quite a blanket statement, but it's, yeah, when you think about it, yes. So I would look at that whole bundle of the process, not just the part where the knowledge work comes in. Okay, that doesn't work in isolation. There's not just a bit of something that's completely disconnected from other processes that someone sits there and goes, oh, I'm doing this, has nothing to do with anything else. It's usually tied in to a very, very meticulous process. And of course, we have no shortage of these processes in IP. So I would look at the whole thing. I would look at the entire thing and say, of course, I'm not then changing the knowledge bit of it. Well, I might, if I want to, I don't know, use AI sort of solutions to potentially improve on that. But it's really about looking at the whole thing, not just picking out the knowledge bit of it.
Yeah, I think what you say is quite often forgotten. It is so obvious that you cannot do this creative work when nothing is organized. Yeah, so you have to handle the documents, you have to handle the representatives from the company or colleagues. Maria Boyko-Weinans mentioned in the LinkedIn feed that this cooperation, and think about longer time project which takes a year or so, and when this is not well organized, you can be creative as you want, you are killed by the complexity.
And you know what else is very apparent, and we're both aware of that, is that in IP we often tend to work in silos. So the patent attorney tends to do his part of the deal, not really always being fully aware what he does, what comes before, what comes after, and who else is affected, and which processes are actually connected to. Why? Because he's actually busy enough just focusing on the bit that he has to do or she has to do. So the beauty of this is that it widens everyone's horizon by saying, now, listen, this is the tiny bit you contribute, but in order to make that tiny bit happen, these 50 steps come before and these 150 steps come after. So that's what I mean by we need to look at the whole thing and not just this silo work that we do that's often also defined by the roles we hold. It's very clear what an admin person does. It's possibly less clear what a patent attorney does. They often actually do things that I would classify as administrative. So don't do that. Make sure that you can focus on the knowledge generation bit of your work. And don't you worry about the process. That's the whole point of improving them, is that you actually don't have to spend half of your time sorting out these processes or worrying about them in the worst possible case.
Sabine, there is a very interesting question from
Mhm.
Academia, and I don't want to answer that before you answered.
Mhm.
He said
Let's hear it.
he asked, yes, there are available methodologies for process management, and he says, does it make sense to apply that to IP? Or do we need for IP completely new methodologies to manage these assets? And the underlying assumption is that IP is such a different asset from all other assets, so that we need new methodologies. So what are you saying about that?
Now, I want to say this is a beautifully typical IP question, isn't it? How can I reinvent this? How can I make this better? So let me answer it. First of all, thanks for the question. That's a very good question. One thing to clarify beforehand. So these methodologies don't care about the type of work that's being done. Okay, so I think it's important in your head to make that distinction between, yes, I agree, it's a very different industry and a very different sphere to anything else. That's not what the process management or the project management is about, though. You can apply that anywhere. So I would say now, first of all, and I don't want to share too much today, but we are working behind the scenes. We've got this available for the IP space. We're developing this. It's already halfway there. Developing this specifically, not just for the legal space. It's available for the legal space, but for the IP industry. And yes, it can be applied 100%. Because what we're not talking about the content of the work. We're talking about the procedures. We're talking about decision making. We're talking about strategic approaches to something. And that part of it is, of course, transferable. Having said that, because I'm curious, I said that to begin with. Should you develop a new methodology, would you please get in touch with me and share it? Because there might be a new methodology that no one's thought of. And I'm not disputing that might, that's, there might be something.
But I would say before you invest the time in new methodologies, so there are big armies, troops on the ground, day and night, 24/7 to optimize processes, and real brilliant minds thinking about that, because this is on the cornerstone of efficiency discussion in the economy. And just because some IP guys have never heard about the Deming Circle or Kaizen or whatever, and have never thought that should be applied to their work, doesn't mean that it is not applicable. Of course it is. I mean, it is, as you said, it is no question what the process per se is, and this is no question which asset is managed here. You have to adapt it. And I mean, that's the same thing when people write thick books about IP strategy and never mention that there is already a competition strategy discussion out there for the last 50 years. And it's not necessary to invent the wheel. It is simply, we use IP now in a strategic discussion. And what you say is exactly the same. We have so many discussed, well-designed, approved methodologies, which we simply have to apply to the concrete situation. And this simply is not so simple, because that's the trick of business administration, that everything what you can learn there sounds very simple, but when you have to do it in practice in a concrete case, it starts to become complicated and complex. And so, thank you very much. I think so. I have many more questions, but to be honest, we're running out of time this time. I think we should meet a little bit later again when we can talk about the work of the committee at I3PM, and when we can talk about some implementations and cases. So I would be absolutely happy to invite you and maybe some of your committee co-chairs to discuss the improvement of the whole scenery. So
Wonderful.
Sabine told me before we started that she will be available. So some of your questions were not answered because I don't want it to disturb Sabine too much. So many questions are open. We will be available on LinkedIn, and we will discuss that with you now on the chat. And I'm happy to meet you there. So bye, and
thanks everyone for your time.
We are available on the after show party. Bye.
Bye.